Okay, hello everyone. Today is July 19th, 2021. This is a meeting of the SIG Network Policy API subgroup of SIG Network. It is the CNCF certified CNCF Foundation meeting, so please be nice to each other and let's have a good meeting today. So let me go ahead and pull up the agenda here. That's why it made me log out. Okay, so not much to talk about today on the agenda. I just thought we would run over and could even continue the discussion that came out of Friday's meeting. If you could not make it, I went ahead and added the kind of what we ended up talking about or the agenda from that day and also the recording. So you can go back and check it out if you would like. And some of the main outcomes I would say was overall was a talk and decision around breaking out IP block and discussion around how actions should work. Does anyone have any questions from that meeting? Abhishek or Yang, do you want to talk about anything, try to maybe put together a list of what we do now, or what do you think?
Yeah, so Abhishek just messaged me saying that he's joining maybe 10 minutes late. So I kind of like from last meeting, as far as I remember, we basically spent a huge amount of time discussing in the community on that whether we should have those three actions which sort of have priorities amongst themselves, or we should actually do the numeric priority in the cluster network policy. And from my point of view, I feel like the community still has a sort of like divided opinion. Some people still think the priority, the action enums would have their benefits, and a lot of other people also think that the numeric priority in CNP will be more familiar to a lot of current cluster network policy implementations, the CNIs. So I think from what I remember in that meeting, Sanjeev also, we were also talking about, maybe we can discuss some of the I don't know, the experiences I had in implementing something like a numeric priority in CNP in the Amtrak implementation, and to see, where I'm coming from. So I just gotta maybe, talk briefly on that front and see how everybody thinks on that end. So the reason I wasn't really fond of having the numerical priorities in CNP is that, to be honest, this is what we have in Entra. And in Entra, the reason why we need to have the numeric priorities is that there are some other VMware solutions internally that uses those kind of numeric priorities, as a lot of people in the community also mentioned, right? So there are network access lists, like legacy applications, stuff like that. They all use this kind of numeric priority, and it's very familiar to people. So we kind of like wanted to conform to that standard and to develop a solution that is interchangeable with those kind of things. But a major setback or complexity that we found out is that once we introduce numerical priorities, the problem comes in the cardinality of the priorities that we are trying to introduce to the solution. Right now in the Entra cluster network policy, the cardinality is essentially I wouldn't say infinite, but it's a lot. Like it's tens of thousands of priorities in theory that you can insert for a cluster network policy rule. The reason we decided to do that is that, from a user perspective, right? When you create a rule that is priority, let's say 5, and another rule that's priority 6, now somehow you realized that, in between those rules, you wanted to insert something. So our reasoning is that for a Kubernetes sort of like resource, the way you do that shouldn't be that you have to change one of the priorities that's already established, right? So if you have two CMPs, one is priority 5 and one is 6, when you wanted to insert something, you should do something to create a rule that's priority 5.5 instead of having to move a certain rule back or up in order for another rule to fit in. That doesn't really, make sense because you have to do a lot of like manual things, right? And you have to change the existing state of things in the cluster for you to be able to do something like that. So based off that sort of like principle, we introduced the priority to be sort of like a float number. And because of that, the priorities essentially can be really infinite because you can do 5.5, and then once you wanted to insert another priority into the rule, you can do 5.56 or something like that. You can basically carve a arbitrary precise priority based on which priority you want to rule.
So you're creating some sort of like we do with headings, right? It's not a straight namespace anymore. You can have many dots in there in that case, right? 1.4.1.2. if you just want to be able to break apart blocks and in reality build a tree, you get the dot notation, right? And
you don't essentially need to do the dot because you can just append arbitrary numbers after the decimal points that will give you.
That was like a
that will give you a float or essentially cardinality of priorities that you can basically express in a CMP.
Or you go string all the way. Just say there's a string, and you say which literals you can use in it.
That becomes an enum, right? Like if I'm understanding this correctly. But anyway, I guess let me finish real quick on what the problem introduced by this. So because we wanted to have all those priorities are arbitrary priorities that we have in the CMP. Now the problem actually comes in the data path. We wanted the user to basically be able to arbitrarily insert a priority between the two existing priorities. Now the problem is in data path, a lot of times when we're reconciling these rules, right? So there are already some other data path level priorities that we assign to the current priorities. That creates a like one-to-one mapping. So the rules are realized in that regard. Now, if we have actually a bunch of new rules inserted in between the current existing priorities. Now, the problem is on the data path, if the original priorities are not assigned properly or smartly, a lot of times what you would need to do in data path is that you need to sort of like move the original rules that are already realized on the data path.
So you have to shuffle all the rules and go through every single rule to allow for this one weird priority.
Exactly. So the method on how you assign the data path priority to the CMP priorities become a really tricky question. And to be honest with you, like in VMware, we have an entire patent just to be able to do that.
That completely depends on what sort of engine you're using for this, right?
Yes. This
is very implementation specific.
Yes, I definitely agree. This is very implementation specific. But my point being, if on the other CNIs, right, we needed to evaluate if introducing this kind of arbitrary large number of priorities can also cause churn in the data path. And if so, my point being, if we do wanted to introduce priorities by any sort, we needed to sort of like put a cap on the priority numbers that can be introduced. Otherwise, it's just gonna be this incredibly complex problem where you can have, as many priorities as you want, and the priorities can, we can insert priority in between the current priorities and whatnot. There will be a lot of chaotic behavior in the data path to sort of like rearrange the current.
But the priorities is just a way to describe a graph, right? In reality, and I agree with it. That's with one of the most sort of well-used engines we have. This is a problem, but I mean, it's a way to describe a graph, and there are many ways, and there are many tools for this. So it really depends on what you're using. IP tables is one thing. But if you use a dedicated firewall, it has that is set up for these sort of things, is less of a problem. So I think I have no problem saying that we shouldn't do it because it creates problem, let's say, with the most common used tool that we use for this. But I think we should be careful and sort of say that, and be absolute to say that it creates a data path problem. To me, it's like, yes, it can create problems in specific data engines or filter mechanisms. That's my only take. There are other mechanisms that does not have these problems.
So in my mind, I feel like you're just tossed. That's a super complex problem, and it's looking at that's in a super explicit case, right? When the way you all define network policy in Antria. Now the flip side of that problem is looking at how that's explicit for like the whole picture. You can figure out based on priorities how your network security stance looks in Kubernetes, but in like the flip side of things where you only have a couple actions, now the problem is a little abstracted to, rather than how do you implement it, it's how is the end behavior represented, right? When you have multiple policies overlapping. So, it's looking at what problem is harder to solve.
So I think we should be careful. Maybe we say that, yes, this is too much complexity, we don't need it. That is one thing, but I'm just sort of very careful with sort of being sort of all-inclusive. If we can be specific and say that in the Linux kernel we have these problems, so therefore we'll back out of it, or
but I still, I just want to go back a little bit and understand. In your initial proposal, there was only two priorities, right? Denies was executed much before the allows. So deny block was completely separate, and it was in a way higher priority than the allow block. So and that was solving. I mean, at least I'll say, unless you create a some impractical condition, it was solving all the practical problems of the security space, right? So why did the discussion move from these two explicit priorities to this kind of like infinite priorities between rules?
First of all, I don't think we sort of wanted the priorities to be infinite. This is, the whole point I'm trying to make now. The second thing is, we had a discussion last Friday on the current state of the CMP cap with a lot of, other people from, different CNIs and, from Catacol, Cilium, and other things. And we are presenting, this three actions, which is empower. Maybe this is basically a randomly chosen word, for example, and deny and allow for the three actions to see if those three actions can capture all the use cases that we have presented for the CMP problem. Now, a lot of I would say there are Sanjeev who's in the call, and there are also someone, if I remember correctly, from Catacol, feeling that the empower keyword is sort of like a ad hoc keyword, and it's a little bit confusing to a lot of like new users or existing users for that matter, because they're used to the priority numbering and not to those keywords. So those three keywords introduces a hard-coded sort of like priority or precedence model, and it will be not friendly for these users to use. But I see also there are people who are liking the 3 actions proposal, which sort of like they think the empower can sort of like act as a like a delegate action to tell to basically say for the cluster admin, I don't care about this rule. I'm delegating this to the cluster to the Kubernetes network policy to decide what should be the denial or allow. So we are kind of like still debating and exploring on which sort of like approach would be better to A, solve all the use cases, and B, feel is user friendly for all the users across the Kubernetes community to think it is user friendly. So those are the two. I feel like the 2 major things we were trying to consider here. And
so I'd like to add a few things. Firstly, thanks Jan for explaining the issue that you guys had to deal with, and that's very reasonable. That makes sense. I think the way we ended up going this way was, if we only have, firstly, we'll come back to empower, but if we just have deny and allow, either we have to decide that deny is always higher, all denies are always higher priority than all allows, or all allows are always higher priority than all denies. Now, if we take the approach that all denies, we'll come back to empower, but let's say that we didn't have priority numbers, but we have, I think we more or less agreed that there should be more actions than allow, and the first action would be deny. So if you have deny and allow, then you have to have some rule as to whether deny takes priority over allow takes priority over deny, or there's a priority number. If you take deny is higher priority than allow, there are some cases that don't work. Now we can decide whether those are common or not. I think there can be more cases. One example would be, I want to drop all UDP traffic except when it comes from sources 3 and 4. Right?
So I wouldn't say you should talk about the 2 action only without empower. I think
we'll talk about empower as well.
We will have to talk about empower. It has to be a 3 action and not a 2 action.
But I understand what you're saying. The complexity of trying to express that in one rule is very hard.
Yeah. So
yeah. So Sanjeev, I understand that. See, I'll tell you like how. I mean, we had a similar use case, right? So how we did it is like we have something which I can closely relate to empower, deny, allow, but we don't really call it empower, deny, allow. So we basically had three different buckets of deny, allow, right? You have a top level deny followed by allow, which is kind of equal. So I'm talking about the legacy firewall, but I think that will apply to, I think the use cases might be very similar in this Kubernetes environment. So we have a top level deny allow, which is in our case, the like a CIO or so top admin is deciding this is my deny. I don't want anybody to exclude this. So you have 3 blocks of deny allow. So you have a deny allow block which is called must, right? Nobody can change it. And then you have another deny block, which is very close to your empower, that is recommended. So you have a recommended allow block, which is always at the bottom. And in between, the local administrators are free to add their deny allows. So that way you don't have priorities. You have a priority in buckets, but you don't have like infinite priorities. And in each bucket, you have deny followed by allow. I know we can simplify a lot from there, but I think we need to take a middle ground somewhere from infinite possibility of priority, because that becomes very difficult for the users to look into each and every policy to understand really what is happening.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think we probably digressed is I don't really care about the complexity in the implementation. Actually, I do, but it's not the focal point. But I do care about the complexity in creating policies from a user's perspective. And that's why we wanted to find a middle ground between simply allow and whitelist isolation policy that network policy has, and infinite priority. So I think that's why we came up with this 3 priority solution, which kind of addresses all use cases. So Sanjeev was referring to one use case that cannot be addressed, and which is like the exceptions. But that is the reason why we have the three actions and not just 2 actions. So with the 3 actions, we think that it will be much easier for, once user understands what these three separate priorities are for, I think creating or crafting policies which will be much easier as compared to, and much more maintainable over the long run as compared to single priorities. And I think we also mentioned that probably that, I don't know if Yang already mentioned this or not, but with with infinite priorities, I think doing something like namespace isolation and not explicitly allowing intra namespace becomes a bit of hard to manage that.
So let me just finish my chain of thought, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So it's having things like multiple blocks of denial, all of those are tied to different personas. We're here, firstly, we're talking about the number of actions that is single persona. In this case, we're talking about just the cluster admin, right? All those other scenarios like, okay, I can have 3 blocks. The first block is for the admin, the second block is for the tenant, the third block is for the developer, whatever. All those are slightly orthogonal because they are applying to different personas, right? So we have already decided that we're talking about the single persona called cluster admin, and the cluster admin's policies take higher priority over the developer or the tenant level person's priorities. So we do have that block level thing. Now within a block, okay, I'm just putting out the point that if you statically have just all denies priority over all allows, or all allows priority over all denies, there will be cases that don't work, okay? And we can decide whether those are sufficient to, limit, we can live with those or not. And that is why most other ACL vendors, they bite the bullet with the priority numbering, because the priority numbering, yes, the biggest thing with the priority numbers, you may have to reshuffle your priorities sometimes because you run out of priority to squeeze in between, right? And there may be a way to address that by ensuring that anytime you insert priorities, you always insert with gaps, so that there's always room up to a certain point to insert, and after which you just simply stop accepting in between, right? If you look at deny and allow, you are assuming that all your denies are equivalent. So they can be in any order, and all your allows are equivalent. They can be on order. So you're sort of avoiding the issue by just saying, defining your policies by just, all denies are equal and all allows are equal, and all denies are higher priority than all allows. So the point was that, firstly, yes, I do appreciate the point that Yang is saying, which makes sense. And as far as, okay, so now coming back to Empower. The first thing is that I thought that we may have interpreted Empower slightly differently. At least I may have slightly interpreted differently before the Friday call. So I want to be clear on the meaning of Empower right now, okay? If the meaning of Empower is this should be decided by the network policy, right? That means we haven't really done anything from the cluster network policy perspective. Empower is not giving you a third action within cluster network policy. It is saying admin doesn't care, let the namespace handle it. The admin's actions are still denies and allows only. Empower is not a third action for the admin. Well, it is sort of third action for the admin, but it's not a third action for the deny allow rules. Admin can still do only denies and allows. So he still has to have some logic saying, okay, either denies are always a higher priority than allows, or allows are always higher priority than denies. So within the admin's control, Empower is simply punting to the namespace developer, which is fine. But if the admin wants to, like I said, the example I gave, right? The admin wants to do the following policy. I want to deny UDP traffic except when it comes from sources with label A and B. Label A, I want to accept it. Label B, I want to accept it. But I want to, so the requirement is drop all UDP traffic except from labels A and B, right?
Yeah, I think I understand your point, Sanjeev. I think the question on the empower thing is that empower doesn't really serve as a strong allow that's above deny.
So we have two. Sorry to interrupt. Let me just say, we were using the third keyword differently in the past, and now we are using it like a delegate, right? Empower equals delegate. Okay, that admin doesn't care about it, but he lets, I mean, he sort of cares about it, but he lets the namespace developer do what he wants with it. But that hasn't really solved the deny exception problem. What we were doing with the third action in the past was a deny exception, so that then you can have a super allow, deny, and allow.
So here's what I wanted to say on the Friday call, but we didn't have enough time. There were two school of thoughts for the empower. One is where some people understood it as a way to delegate policy or rules. The other set of people understood it as a way to provide exceptions to the deny. And the answer is it is actually doing both. It is trying to empower the namespace administrator, namespace developers by skipping or providing exceptions to the admin's deny rules. So I have this whole set of deny block that I don't want the traffic to be accepted or going to, but here's a piece of that big block which I want the administrators to decide, the namespace owners to decide for themselves. So it is providing an exception to the whole deny by providing the ability to, or giving the ability to the developers by deciding for themselves whether they want to explicitly allow it or they want to isolate it using some default denies on those pods. So it is kind of both, and I that's what I wanted to bring it up. The only thing that it doesn't do, which I agree, and which something that we need to work on, is that if the namespace owner does not decide to take any action, it is always an allow. We may want to also make sure that if the if the namespace developer is not allowing or is not acting upon that exception, then perhaps there is a use case where we would also want to deny it and not just do a plain allow as the default rules. Initially, we thought that default network policy could could be used for that use case, but again, that's a different conversation where whether we want to have two separate CRDs or not. But I think there is room for us to clarify empower and maybe extend it so that we don't need a DNP and we use this particular action field to do something of that sort, where the disposition is kind of taken, like is configurable. I haven't thought through this, and to be honest, after the Friday call, towards the end of around evening on Friday evening, Tim Hawken and I had a chat, and we kind of like, I think he laid out this particular half-baked idea around clarifying the empower use case, wherein which may lead us to not needing DNPs. And I think when Sanjeev was trying to say that it was not clear whether empower is an exception or whether empower is a way to delegate, I think it's both, and I think we should clarify that. So maybe one of the things that I want to do this week is with the team sit down and kind of clarify this empower block a bit, and see if we can take Tim's idea and kind of like fully bake it, and if it makes sense, and we can see if that can be altered and added to the proposal.
Okay, Abhishek, so in the, and at least in some part of the V2 discussion, and we took Sanjeev's example of UDP in consideration, right? So based on that, we actually in the V2 we had written a proposal which Andrew has just pasted on this, right? I would request you to see this because we thought of all those scenarios, and at least we think that it solves those scenarios without introducing too many cardinalities in the priority space.
Isn't part of the
I think when you say multiple blocks, are you referring to multiple blocks all within the cluster admin's control, or multiple blocks, one block per persona?
No, so if you see in this case, the three blocks, the top and bottom blocks are in the custom in the CNP space. The middle block is what we left for the namespace admin.
So isn't what you're all saying is like we need to have a deterministic way for people and I mean for the system to express the rules in, right? So people understand it and they work out. And then we need to have a scalable and efficient way to implement the filtering on each node.
Yes, so the idea was pretty simple, and I think CNP actually captures a lot of things. We want from a CNP perspective or the cluster admin's perspective, right, a definite behavior in certain aspect, right? As a cluster admin, I want to deny certain traffic and I want to allow certain traffic. Let's say I want to allow traffic because I am monitoring and I want to allow traffic that all pods should be reachable to the monitoring thing. Whether there is a case or not, but I think as a CNP admin, I want some traffic to be always allowed and some traffic to be always denied. That goes in the must block. That is non-negotiable. After that, I have some recommendation. Like if I want to put my monitoring block in the recommendation, I can say, okay, all pods should be able to go to the monitoring block. But if one network namespace admin does not want that, they can override that. What they cannot override is the must block. But last block, which we call recommended block, is very similar to empower, but it's like a recommendation. If you don't do this, if you don't want to override at a namespace admin, you will follow all of these things. But if you want, you can override that. And it is only allowed because anyway, by default, it denies.
Yeah, so Nadeem, I think your bottom block is what we have proposed as default network policy. And not really an empower. Empower is actually part of the stricter rules, which is the top block, where you have your deny rules, but you don't want certain traffic within those deny rules as you have deny rules and you have like certain exceptions to those deny rules. So your empower is kind of like that, the exception to that deny rule, which is kind of like your deny allow. If I'm not mistaken, your deny allow is saying that here is some deny traffic, but allow certain of this traffic from this. So you're kind of like providing some exception. Is that correct?
No, we were actually denying first. I mean, we were having all the denies first and then allow rules.
Okay, I mean, so how do you propose to do certain exceptions to deny? For example, you might say that deny every traffic from kube system namespace or to kube system namespace, and just this might be is a very hypothetical scenario, but deny every traffic from kube system namespace, but allow the core DNS pods to be able to talk from kube system namespace. How would you write that rule with your deny allow?
And that you want to do at the CNP level?
Yeah, at the top level, yeah, the stricter level.
Okay, I have to think about that. I was thinking
that's
these
right.
kind
So
of
I think
things.
we are mixing up multiple things, right? We at the moment what we want to focus on, just to help everybody stay on the same point, which is for a single persona. That means for the cluster admin, how do I have denies and allows with exceptions? Okay. Of course, something can be delegated to the namespace guy and he may or may not do something and we can play some games with the other personas. But for that one persona, the cluster admin persona, he wants to do strong allows, strong denies, and exceptions, right? That's really what it is. So that's why I'm saying that, okay, just two action. I understand your point, Abhishek, and I need to think about that as well.
So the reason is, I think Nadeem's case is a more specialized. I think the CNP case is like a simplified version of what Nadeem is trying to propose. Nadeem is doing it for many personas, but if you just say that in my cluster there are only two personas, which is the cluster admin and the namespace owner, then it kind of like boils down to the CNP approach, which is what we are trying to propose. So if we we too, maybe I have not looked at the document yet, but maybe but at least based on the discussion, it seems like this is like the simplified version of Nadeem's proposal, but with the ability to provide exceptions to deny.
Yeah, so I think the key point here again, just to make sure we are on the same page, is that cluster admin, the cluster network policy, Right now, our primary discussion is everything to do with the cluster admin persona. And the cluster admin persona, without having to depend upon what the namespace guy might or might not do, wants to have these capabilities. He wants to be able to strongly allow, strongly deny, and make exceptions without knowing what the namespace guy might or might not choose to do, because he has no control. That's a separate persona, right? The cluster admin is the super user. He wants to be able to do that.
Yes.
So as long as we can do denies, allows, and exceptions without depending upon other personas or other blocks, which some other personas do.
Correct. So now,
that's where I'm going.
so this is the use case, and you've correctly summarized it. So denying all traffic can be done with a deny rule. Allowing all traffic can be done with an allow rule, and providing exceptions to the deny can be done with an empower rule. And that is what I want to convey,
again,
that the
empowering
is meant to provide exceptions to that to those deny rules. And by the basic waterfall model, okay, if you don't really have an allow for that particular exception, then it kind of falls to the waterfalls through to the namespace owner whether he wants to deny or allow it. And if he doesn't, then it's whatever the default policy for the cluster
is. But can there not be a case where the cluster admin doesn't want to or need to depend upon the namespace developer, right? He wants to
okay, let me ask you one question. When you say you want to provide exception, what is that you want to do? And then maybe I can.
Well, the example I gave earlier, let's start with that. There could be other exception examples, but let's start with that. I want to drop UDP traffic except coming from label X and Y.
And when you say except coming from label X and Y, what happens if the traffic is coming from X and Y? Do you want it to be allowed? Do you want it to be, as an admin, I don't care. Is there, because there are two different
Let's look at both
intents.
cases. Let's say both those cases. One is I want to have a strong allow.
Okay, then in that case you can. Okay, you want to do a strong allow
from label. I want to drop traffic of a certain kind. Let's say I want to drop UDP traffic, except when coming from labels X and Y, in which case I want to definitely allow.
You want to definitely allow. Okay, you can do that by putting that in the allow rule, and by doing the empower as well. Now, would that satisfy you, your use case?
Let's dig into it. Again, empower means you're letting the namespace guy do something for you.
No. I'm saying if we go to the precedence diagram, I don't know who's sharing it.
So now you're using, let's call empower not as delegate, but let's call empower as
I have always been saying the empower is a way to provide exceptions and to delegate. Now we can look at the Andrew, if you want to, you can share the.
So essentially, I guess our point is for the same part of traffic, if there is no allow rules, then empower is essentially a delegate. But if in the specific case that you just mentioned, we have an empower and allow on specific traffic, which is UTP from B and C, then it's a strong allow. Does that make sense? So the delegation only happens when you don't have an allow rule on the same thing and you have an empower. Now it basically just falls into the namespace Kubernetes policies.
Sorry, delegation happens when you don't have repeat that, please, because we're overloading.
Yeah, sure. So let me go to.
We're overloading a super allow and we're overloading a delegate. These are two different things. Super allow means.
No. So the empower is not a delegation keyword. The effect of empower without allow rule is a delegation. That makes sense, right?
Without any allow rule? So the moment I have any allow rule, then
can
empower.
Can we see this precedent model?
So that's very non-intuitive.
Yeah.
The moment I have any allow rule, empower actually becomes delegate. Otherwise, it's an allow.
Yeah. Yes.
So empower equals allow, except if there is an allow rule, then it becomes delegate.
No,
that's the other way around.
Can we go through this precedence model? So let's say your traffic matches your exception rule, right? Which is, you want to say it's any traffic coming from app DB should be allowed. Let's say for simplicity. right? Is that a fair assumption? And you and in your case, you want to definitely allow that traffic, correct?
I want
But
to
you
definitely
may
allow from this label,
yes,
but from other labels, I want to drop UDP traffic.
got it. So now you have a a very wide rule, which is a CNP deny rule, which drops traffic from all labels, and you would create an empower rule to provide that exception, which is from this particular label. So now that empower rule becomes an exception to your catch-all deny rule. So what it does, if you look at the flow chart, does it match to the empower rule? Yes. So it goes to the next action, which is the allow rule. Now here, if you want to strictly allow this traffic, you create the same rule here as allow, and then it will be strictly allowed. And your second intention was that you don't really care about whether that traffic is allowed or not. I just don't want it to be denied as per my, right? That was your second intention. In that case, you do not create such an allow rule, and then it will not match. So it will go to the network policy, and let's say you don't have any rules, it just keeps on going no, 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 all the way to the cluster default.
So here's the point, and I partially followed that. I'll need to go back on that example, but let me going back to the very initial point of what you said. That means we'll have to now have allow policies for all possible labels initially. That goes back to the explosion. That goes back to the explosion problem.
No, why do you need to do allow for all possible? You only need to do allow for labels that you strictly want to allow.
But we've decided in this case that allows are lower priority than denies, right? According to this, if you're following the logic that empower greater than deny.
So my example for a catch-all deny rule was just for the purpose of this example. I mean, for this particular flow, the administrators are not necessarily going to do a deny all rule and then opening up traffic that way. That's not, I think, the strict way of doing it. The most common way of doing this would be namespace isolations, wherein, or the tenancy isolation model, wherein the namespace, the administrator will have like these boundaries for tenancies within which the traffic may or may not be allowed, but at least inter namespace boundaries or inter tenancy boundaries will definitely not be allowed. So that's the main use case I feel like the users will use this for.
But if you do that now, that's a separate use case. I mean, are we saying that the example I mentioned we don't need to solve, right? Because now we're talking about only tenancy, only namespace isolation.
But if you're saying that your example is, I want to deny everything but this label, that is your example, right?
No. I'm saying I want to deny a certain kind of traffic from all labels except these two labels, or except this one.
Right. So then in that case, you only need 3 rules. That deny rule to deny that certain kind of traffic, then an empower rule to provide those exceptions. Yeah, and the third
again,
rule for allow.
That doesn't work. I'll tell you why. Because if you say the deny rule to drop these packets, and we are saying denies are always higher priority than allows, then
you are providing exceptions. You are providing exceptions to those deny by writing an empower rule.
Yeah. So
if your exception is matched, so if you walk through this precedence model, I think it will answer your question. So maybe I should ask the group whether what I'm trying to say was that totally gibberish, or this precedent is, first of all, is this precedence model not clear? If we take an example, then we will definitely work on this diagram.
So if you guys look at what I posted on the chat, I listed out for Sanjeev's specific case what will happen if there were 2 cases, right? One is that we wanted to deny UDP traffic from everywhere except for A and B. I wanted to ensure those UDP traffic are always allowed. And the second case is that I wanted to deny all UDP traffic except for UDP traffic from A and B, and I don't care, right? So the second case is a delegation problem. Where the first case is that we wanted to ensure that A and B UDP traffic is always allowed, and the others are always denied.
Yes.
So if we have those three rules for the strong allow, one is for, first of all, for A and B UDP traffic, we empower it, meaning that we goes around the deny. And the rule 3 strongly allows that. So there's no way namespace users can override this allow rule because it's on a higher precedence than the namespace rules. Now for the other UDP traffic, it will hit the number 2 rule, which will be denied. On the other hand, for the delegation problem, right, we have a denied all UDP traffic, but we have a empower UDP A and B. So those traffic will go to the Kubernetes network policy precedence level, and the namespace admins can do whatever they want on the UDP traffic on A and B because that's a delegation. It's literally saying that I don't care because I've empowered it and I've not allowed it specifically. So that's a delegation. So I guess the only confusion part now is that when a cluster admin wants to explicitly strong allow something, and there is actually a deny all in place, he or she will need to do an empower and a strong allow at the same time in order for him to do that. But other than that, the precedence model feels like really straightforward to me.
No, my point is that if you want a strong allow, have a keyword called strong allow. And then if you want to delegate, have a separate keyword called delegate. Overloading these two things, assuming that strong allow plus deny plus allow is the logic we want without delegation, because we are overloading two meanings to empower. That's one point, right?
The empower is
Might
exception.
help is like a total is maybe based on the current spec, the YAML examples of both these cases with the current, readout, so that you could see, is this going to be too complicated? For me, like I have the diagram precedence model makes total sense. I have a hard time, really talking about complexity of use until I'm writing YAML. That's just me. So
yeah. So here, thanks.
This diagram is showing strong allow. It's not showing delegation. So if you want to do strong allow, call.
Yeah. So Sanjeev, can I ask you whether these 4 use cases are everything that a cluster administrator would do? A strong deny, a strong allow, a deny but exception, and a deny but delegate. Are these 4 broad topics covering all the things that an administrator would want? Is that fair, or did I miss anything?
That covers more, right? That covers more. I don't know whether that covers the entire universe of possible things you would want.
So the strong allow, would that be to make sure that users can't hurt themselves, or?
No. Yes. So sorry, can you repeat that?
Strong allow, is that there in that case to make sure that users don't shoot themselves in the foot?
Correct. For example,
or maybe it's just something that as a compliance reason required, right? So I wanted to strong allow everything from and to Prometheus namespace, and the users cannot do a Kubernetes network policies to say, okay, don't want it to talk to the Prometheus namespace. They cannot do that. That's when we actually needed a strong allow. But the only time we needed a strong allow paired with an empower is when we have a deny all rule, right? So if we don't have a deny all rule, then the strong allow itself suffices. But
that's what
the only
was getting at, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one question I have, I'm still not clear. Why do we need this delegate if we already have the DNP covering the allows which can be denied by namespace admin?
We are essentially hoping that with some torque in this keywords, we can actually ditch the DNP. So as I understand, this is what Abhishek is saying. All of the discussion with Tim last week.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a point of confusion. confusion, Nadeem. It's a great question. I really think that's confusing people.
No, so I can maybe give a stab at this. Essentially, the reason why you would want to delegate certain things. So think about namespace isolation, where you want to provide inter namespace isolation, basically saying that Coke should not be allowed to talk to Pepsi, but you don't necessarily want to make the decision for the Coke itself. So for example, if you are going to say, I want Coke not to talk to Pepsi, but everything within Coke to talk to each other by strong allow, then a network policy owner of that Coke namespace cannot write isolation rules within his own namespace, because it will never be matched, because an strong allow will always allow this intra namespace traffic. In this case, you would want the namespace owner to maybe, you know what, within my Coke boundaries, I want to have certain pods which needs to be isolated, and I will use my Kubernetes network policies.
Yeah, so if we replace, I mean, the DNP as a bottom block, I'll call it something like a weak allow. Or
yes, yeah. So I think, as Yang mentioned, the DNP is something, and I think some folks in the community also are kind of, you know, on the fence when it comes to supporting 2 CRDs. So that's why you know, the core of, there are a few things that I spoke to Tim about, and one of this was the ability to maybe extend Empower to also provide some sort of default rule so that we don't need a DNP, or maybe we can think of not having an Empower, but or not, I mean, or having 2 different CRDs. The other point that I also wanted to bring up quickly, because we have only 3 minutes, is that we have decided to remove IP blocks from this proposal, external traffic, for very good reasons. But I think Tim was kind of very, you know, not so happy about one particular aspect of that, is that it allows, so we are propositioning this cluster network policy as a guardrails to developers, right? You know, we kind of like want to make sure that developers don't overstep or create these security rules which could be a security hazard. So the cluster network policy should encompass this. Now, the default network policy is able to, sorry, not default, the Kubernetes network policy has IP blocks. And if a cluster network policy cannot lock down those external traffic, namespace owners can write an IP block rule and bypass this traffic and still be able to talk to outside world. So CNPs are kind of useless in that sense. And he would want us to solve that use case as well, or at least in some fashion, so that, you know, the cluster network policy is like someone who can lock down these things. And I think that's a very valid you know, request for us.
Is that mainly for ingress or egress?
Doesn't mostly it will be for egress, because, you know,
right.
But you know, we should
That's a
make
really
sure that
good point. It's a super good point, though.
Yeah, because tomorrow there will be a CVE where they're saying, as a cluster administrator, I locked down.
But hear me out. I think, you know, this is an unfortunate situation where the mistakes of network policy are being thrown at us. And I think it can be solved by either making this cluster network policy kept more complicated and confusing, or segmenting the problem like it should have been done originally into another object. That's just my opinion on it, but.
So I proposed to him something which, without making our CNP more complex, was that we have a way to differentiate between intra-cluster traffic versus cluster external traffic by doing like an empty selector, or sorry, not an empty selector, but an empty egress rule or an empty ingress rule. So essentially, if we have something like that, where we have the ability to say that an empty ingress rule or an egress rule means all traffic, not just intra-cluster traffic. On the other hand, if you want to just talk about intra-cluster traffic, you have an empty namespace selector, and that would only mean that you're talking about only intra. So here, at least we can do all or nothing external cluster external traffic, and I think he was okay with that. But I also wanted to bring this up to the group, and I was going to further propose this during the Thursday meeting.
Yeah,
So what is that?
That's
What
like
is the
a
reason of
whole.
not? Sorry.
So
That's like a whole nother discussion. That's sorry, but go ahead and say.
Yeah, but I did want to kind of like give everyone sort of a heads up about this this discussion as well.
Totally.
Yeah, so my question was basically, Abhishek, what is the justification for not supporting IP block in CNP if it is supported in KNP?
Yeah, so I think that's where Andrew was trying to say that it's unfortunate that KNP does support it without having had too much of thought into it. But a couple of weeks ago in the SIG network meeting, I think there was a lot of discussion around how to handle ingress traffic, which is cluster external. Because what happens is there is a lot of natting that will happen before the packet actually reaches your cluster. So you're essentially losing out onto that original source IP, and the behavior is not defined. And because of this, it's a bit of weird to support IP blocks in CNP, because we don't want to make the same mistake. And we are hoping that we can come to a good agreement in terms of what the expectation should be for IP blocks with V2 and CNP. So that's why we decided that we'll, in order to move forward, we will start small. We'll remove that use case and we'll iterate on that when the right time comes.
Yeah.
So that at least
let's talk about. I'll add that to the agenda for next time, Nadeem. I think it's something cool we can talk about. I know we are a minute over time. One thing that may help at least resolve the discussion we were going over today with actions is, how about Sanjeev makes a proposed YAML for a priority implementation, while Abhishek comes back with a proposed YAML with this 3-action implementation, and we can kind of look at it from a user POV, right? And say, what is more intuitive for a user to write and to read, right? And we can narrow it down just on this one case we were talking about, like throughout the meeting today. What do you all think about that?
So something that's intuitive for the user is a slightly secondary point, right? Firstly, we are talking about just covering functionality, right? And then we talk about what is intuitive versus non-intuitive. Right now,
I think we cover functionality. If there's something that isn't, let's like clearly document that so that we don't just talk about it. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. So that's where I was trying to sort of bring out this point about the exceptions versus the delegation and all that. And that discussion was a little bit mixed. So I can just sync up with Abhishek a little bit, because looks like he's had some more follow-up after that. So maybe we'll try and converge to some level of commonality offline, and we can summarize that in a follow-up call. Whether that means YAML or whether that means something else, let's not predefine that right now. I definitely appreciate all the points that Young and Abhishek make. So it's all good stuff. So here's offline, and we'll summarize it in the following call.
So here's what I plan to do. Maybe in the next couple of days, I will update this agenda with some use cases, because that was anyways on our action item list, to have more specific use cases. I will try to bring up at least a few specific use cases. And then by Monday meeting, I'll also try, me, Young, and others, Satish also, we'll try to come up with the sample specs for those use cases. And Sanjeev, you can come up with the priority based. And also feel free to add more use cases, for those which I have missed out.
Keep in mind, it's not that I really want the priority case. I just feel like
someone has to do it.
It's not like I'm the owner of the priority case and you guys, we're all the owners of this whole thing, right? The point is,
I agree, but someone has to.
I would love to work on that, as long as it addresses the issues, right? I mean, whatever, 3 priorities.
We will only know once we write some samples. Right. I mean, unless we don't write it, we don't know.
It's not like, hey, this is our stuff, and you go write your number priority, then tell us, right? I mean,
absolutely not the case. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to have an API which solves all use cases, which is intuitive for the users, and which will be used. And it doesn't matter if it's a 3-action proposal.
And that just happens to be something that people have used. That's all, right? It's not any of us are reading that, right? So,
I agree. I'm in the same boat. I'm here to foster the discussion. I think we need to have a document. Like basically we can talk in circles for a long time if we clearly
Yeah,
have
and there's
this laid
nothing really
out
to
on
doc.
paper.
Go ahead.
I mean, just if you think there's like a specific scenario that this does not cover, like let's write that down and go and walk through it together.
Yeah, so I gave one example, but I'll think about it some more, and also if it's okay with Abhishek or Young, sync up offline, because I think there's also 2 or 3 confusing threads here. One is the overloading of the delegation. One is the strong allow with exceptions. So yeah, we'll sort it out. But in terms of ordering, I mean, that's pretty clear. I mean, people know what it is. It's just an ordering. There, the issue is simply implementation, not functionality. With ordering, functionality can be implemented, but the gotcha is that when you want to insert something in the middle, you end up churning the whole thing. So that's really the only problem with ordering. Maybe there might be some other secondaries, but functionally, the ordering covers all the cases. Now, it may have this issue that you can't easily insert in the middle of 2 consecutive orders, which may require a separate solution if we want to go that way.
Right.
So,
And I think the last point I'd like to leave on for everyone is Dan Winship did bring up an interesting idea that was kind of an intersection of these, which was, a priority ordering, but with predefined priorities that could be extended upon. So you start with just maybe 0 and 1 as the only priorities that are allowed. And then in the future, if we need to extend them, we can extend them. So that was, I thought, an interesting middle ground in between these two,
Yeah, and you can always say that, we allow 10 priorities, and if you want to further insert something in the middle, too bad. You'll have to just equal to one of the existing. I mean, what we're doing with buckets is also priorities, just 3 priorities. So yeah, again, not to harp too much on the priorities, but I think there's 2 or 3 different points here about the delegation versus the super allow and exceptions. So we'll sort it out offline and also by the time of next week's call.
Great. Well, thanks so much for coming, everyone, today. Really great conversation. Really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you all next Monday. Hope you have a good day. Talk to you later.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.